Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1114 for June 22nd, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
Without argument, that there wasn't one reason, there were several why Campbelltown's distilling industry disintegrated. One of the biggest reasons was price. It was always the cheapest whiskey in the market, always. It had been from the day it started till the day it finished. The only time it isn't is today.
There was a time when Campbeltown dominated Scotch whisky, but over the years, the number of Campbeltown distilleries dwindled from more than 30 to just 2, Springbank and Glen Scotia. David Stirk has written what may be the definitive book on the history of Campbeltown's heyday, Whiskyopolis, and he'll join me later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have tasting notes for a modern-day Campbeltown single malt in the What I'm Tasting This Week department, behind the label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hello, Gabriel Cardarella for Jewers. The 2025 release of our Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is a masterpiece, crafted for those who appreciate the finer things, whether on the course or in a glass. More on that in a moment.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Sadly, we have more news of layoffs this week, this time at Tobermory Distillery on the Isle of Mull. Somewhere between 6 and 8 workers have been laid off as the distillery cuts back on production. A spokesperson for CVH Spirits, which owns Tobermory, blamed the production cuts on the ongoing slowdown in global demand for Scotch whisky, and said in an email, quoting now, "Whilst production is continuing, it is at a much lower level to reflect demand, and due to this, a small number of roles are at risk of redundancy. Decisions like this are always difficult, however, are necessary to ensure our business remains sustainable." CVH Spirits also owns Bunnahabhain and Deanston distilleries, but there's no word on cutbacks there. Meanwhile, job cuts are coming at Pernod Ricard, though it's too soon to say how many or where the cuts will come from. Company executives unveiled a blueprint for reorganizing the business into 2 groups based on brands. Jameson will be part of the Gold division along with the Mumm and Perrier-Jouët champagnes and Martell Cognac. It's not clear whether Redbreast and the company's other Irish whiskies will be part of that group. The Crystal Group will include Havana Club Rum, Absolute Vodka, and a number of smaller brands. It's also not clear where the North American Distillers Unit will fall into which division. What's being called Tomorrow 2 by CEO Alexander Ricard would, quoting now, further advance the simplification of our organization. Job cuts are expected to be announced by the end of this year. The Canadian boycott of American whiskies is weakening somewhat. Provincial liquor boards in Alberta and Saskatchewan plan to start importing American bourbons and other spirits again, while other provinces are holding firm in the boycott that started in February as part of the trade war between Canada and the U.S. 7 American whiskey makers are cheering this week after the International Wine and Spirits Competition released the results of its judging of North American whiskeys. They were the 4% of all entries that received gold outstanding medals for scoring between 98 points and 100 points from the IWSC judges. The list includes 888 Distilleries' The Notch 12-year-old American single malt. It's the first American single malt to be honored by the IWSC, along with the new Maker's Mark Star Hill Farm Wheat Whiskey, Bullet Barrel Strength, Pinhook Bourbon's Vertical Series 9-year-old Rye, King's Family Distillery's 8-year-old Tennessee Whiskey, Frank August Small Batch Kentucky Straight Whiskey, and the Predictum 15-year-old Kentucky Straight Bourbon. All 7 advanced to the trophy judging round, with the winners to be announced in November. And we have a link to the complete list of medal winners in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. In other news, Glenfarclas is coming out with its oldest whiskey ever. It's a 70-year-old single malt distilled in 1953. It comes from first fill sherry casks and will be available at specialist whiskey retailers worldwide. There's no word on pricing. Glenmorangie has been adding some age to its single malt range, and the latest addition comes to the La Santa. The sherry cask matured whiskey gets an extra 3 years and will now be sold as a 15-year-old Scotch when it hits the market next month. Last year, Glenmorangie raised the original from 10 to 12 years and the Nectar to 16 years old. The 15-year-old La Santa will carry a recommended retail price of $70 a bottle. Nicnean is coming out with its annual release of Huntress. This year's edition was produced using a yeast normally used for French sparkling wine and has whiskies in the blend from as far back as 2017. It'll be available starting next month with a recommended retail price in the U.S. of $120 a bottle. There's no word on pricing in other markets. Bladnoch Master Distiller Dr. Nick Savage has been hard at work, creating the second edition in the Bladnoch Wave series. Wave 2, Distillery and Spirit, has a complex blend of whiskey matured in recharred butts and first-filled bourbon barrels, along with whiskey from last year's Wave 1 Time and Maturation release. That's because the distillery only fills 1,817 bottles for each wave, reflecting Bladnoch's opening in 1817. The rest of that year's whiskey goes into the next year's Amontillado Sherry Tun and a modified Solaris system maturation. Wave 2 is available through the Bladnoch website for $144 a bottle at current exchange rates. Now, if Campbeltown is known as Whiskyopolis, the Welsh town of Swansea is known as Copperopolis for its role in copper production over the years. Now, Penderyn has released a whiskey under the Copperopolis name as part of its Icons of Wales series of whiskies. It's a natural fit since Penderyn's Swansea distillery is located in the former Swansea Copper Works. The whiskey is finished in sweet red wine casks and is priced at £62.95 through hardtofindwhiskey.com. The third release in the McLean Foundation's series of charity whiskeys is out now. It's a 5-year-old single-cask whiskey from the Rassay Distillery, bottled at 61.1% ABV and matured in virgin Chinquapin oak. The foundation was created by the legendary Charlie McLean and his 3 sons, and proceeds from the whiskey will help fund clean water wells in Madagascar. Ewan, Jamie, and Lachlan McLean are currently rowing 9,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean to raise £1 million for clean water projects. The whiskey is available through Royal Mile Whiskies for £115 a bottle. Isle of Harris Distillery is releasing a new Croft Strength version of the Hierarch single malt. It'll go on sale July 2nd at the duty-free shops in Aberdeen, Edinburgh, and Glasgow airports for £65 a bottle and will be available at other UK airports later this year. Turning now to American whiskies, Heaven Hill has released the year's second batch of Larceny Barrel Proof. This uncut whiskey comes from casks 6 to 8 years old and is bottled at 58.7% ABV. Batch B 525 carries a recommended retail price of $64.99 a bottle. I have a sample of it, and I'll share my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. The guys at Pursuit Spirits are releasing a cognac cask-finished rye. The whiskey came from Bardstown Bourbon Company and Sagamore Spirit and is finished in XO cognac casks. It'll go on sale July 3rd at Pursuit United's Louisville Distillery, just before its Whiskey Row tasting room opens up next month. Newly minted Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Famer and former state senator Damon Thayer bottles whiskey under the Kentucky Senator brand, and he's expanding into Louisiana with the Louisiana Senator brand. Each of his whiskeys is named for a historical political figure, and Thayer went all in with his first Louisiana release. It's named for the controversial Huey P. Long. Google him if you want the whole backstory behind Long's dominance of Louisiana politics until his assassination in 1935. The Huey Long Bourbon is a 7.5-year-old whiskey blended by the Potter Jane Distillery team of Denny Potter and Jane Bowie. It'll be available in Louisiana for $120 a bottle. Country music star Dierks Bentley is out with the second release in his Road 94 series of bourbons. Broken Branches is a 5-year-old bourbon made at Green River Distilling and used toasted oak staves resting in the barrels to add complexity to the whiskey. It's being released in conjunction with his new Broken Branches album and summer concert tour. Only 1,500 bottles will be available through an online lottery for $99.99 each. And finally, we say goodbye to this week to Slane Castle entrepreneur Lord Henry Mount Charles, who died this week after a battle with cancer. He was the man behind Slane Castle's legendary series of music festivals and founded the Slane Castle Distillery with his son Alex Cunningham in a partnership with Brown-Forman. Lord Henry Mount Charles was 74 years old. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar now and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Uncle Nearest Distillery in Shelbyville, Tennessee hosts the Wheels and Whiskey Car Show this Saturday, complete with a single barrel release bottled just for the show. Bonham's Skinner has an auction of rare whiskeys on Thursday at its gallery in Boston. The Erin Malt and Music Festival is this coming weekend in Lacranza, Scotland. Hard Truth Distilling in Nashville, Indiana hosts the Charred Truth Live Fire Invitational Barbecue Cookout Friday night and Saturday, and the debut Asbury Park Beer, Wine, and Spirits Fest is Saturday in Asbury Park, New Jersey. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is more than just exceptional whiskey. It's a tribute to the U.S. Open Championship. Each year's limited edition release is crafted to honor the host course, integrating its spirit through a unique cask finish. For the 2025 tournament at Oakmont in Pennsylvania, Dewar's continues this tradition with an exceptional 19-year-old whiskey, double-aged, then finished in a way that nods to Pennsylvania's long-standing connection to apple brandy. Created by 6-time Master Blender of the Year Stephanie McLeod, this year's edition is finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, imparting layers of green apples, apricots, citrus, warm spice, and a touch of honey. This isn't just a tribute, it's a masterclass in blending. Seek it out, savor every drop, and trust me, you'll be glad you did. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch Whisky, 43% alcohol by volume.
At its peak a little more than a century ago, Campbeltown was a dominant force in Scotch whisky, with nearly 30 distilleries in and around the town. For a number of reasons, almost all of them closed, and the two that survived to this day, Springbank and Glen Scotia, went through various shutdowns over the years before their ongoing futures were secured. David Stirk researched the history of the Campbeltown distilleries for his new book, Whiskyopolis. It's a definitive history of the people and distilleries that put Campbeltown on the map. We talked the other day on a Zoom call. This was your second crack at a Campbeltown book, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, the first I began in 2004 while I lived in Campbelltown. And it's not really a history book, the first one. It's a collection of anecdotal evidence of the industry without much of a narrative. It borrowed heavily on other works of pre-industrialized era Campbelltown distilling, so a lot of illicit stuff, and a bit of the history of Campbelltown. And on this one, I thought I'll get rid of all that. Let's start at the beginning of the industrialized era, 1817, and work from then on. So when people think about the whiskey industry, we're really kind of thinking about the early part of the 19th century onwards.
What made Campbellton the whiskey city that it was back in the day?
Well, there's quite a few reasons for it. Its illegal history led a lot towards how many distilleries came. So there were a lot of people already distilling, and when it became too difficult for the distillers, who then became illegal, and that's the period, the 20 years before 1817, where there were no legal distilleries in the area at all. They kept doing it, but they went underground with it. And as soon as the laws changed and it became profitable again, these guys were ready to rock and roll and just moved into premises, many of which were already there. There was already quite a malting industry that were obviously supplying beer, but a lot of the illegal trade as well. They were already in the town. There was already quite big buildings for the rum trade and other spirits that were coming in through Kintyre. So a lot of these buildings were ready to go, and the guys sort of stepped in, bought the plant, and they were up and running sometimes as quick as 6 months.
At one point, Campbellton had close to 30 distilleries, right?
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I think whenever you've got a concentration of any business type, you will always have a survival of the fittest. And we see very early on that some of the smaller players and some of the guys who weren't in the proximity of the borough itself, be that Dallintober or Campbeltown or Dallaruin, they kind of went away very quickly. But within the town itself, you had some of the much smaller works get turned into bigger, or simply were bought out, shut down, or simply closed down. And a lot of that was due to, with any business, as demand grows and as production changes, if you're too small to adapt, you simply become unprofitable. So from the beginning, we saw a closure of distilleries sort of around the 1830s to the 1850s, 60s. And then we had the heyday, which is really sort of the 1870s to the final parts of the 19th century. After the 19th century, we see the real problems begin. And that's when we see the disintegration from Barnard's day, when he visited in 1887 of 21 distilleries, to just 2 surviving past the 1830s.
What did you learn from writing this book?
I learned pretty much the kind of what I wanted to learn when I did the first book. What was the reason? What was the single reason? And I learned, I think, pretty much without argument, that there wasn't one reason. There were several why Campbelltown's distilling industry disintegrated. One of the biggest reasons was price. It was always the cheapest whiskey in the market. Always. It had been from the day it started till the day it finished. The only time it isn't is today. That's a whole nother story. So price was a problem. It was considered cheap. It was considered filler. It lost its prestige at the turn of the century. Before that, Campbelltown whiskey had been seen like Islay whiskey as one of the great distilling regions. And price became a problem. It became notorious for not blending well. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is that Campbelltown whiskey always comes to the top. And that's not meant as a compliment, although the speaker at the time realized his audience was all Campbelltonian, so quickly turned it around to say, just like the Campbelltown people, the whiskey always comes to the top. What he meant was, it doesn't blend well. It's an oil and vinegar situation. And unfortunately, he was inferring that Campbelltown whiskey was the vinegar in this analogy. So you've got price problems, you've got blenders turning their back on the industry as a whole. It became a byword for bad whiskey for blenders. You then had a downturn in the industry as a whole from the 1900s onwards. You had the emergence of Speyside whiskey being the blender's preference. So while they were doing really well, Campbelltown was doing really, really badly. And then lots of other factors like the Great War that took a huge number of men away from the area. You had lots of second and third generation being killed in that war or simply not coming back. I don't mean that they died in France or Belgium. They just didn't come back to Campbelltown. So you had a real sort of exodus of distilling talent, and with that, a desire to keep these old decrepit distilleries going. And it is testament to the couple of families that did keep it going that there is any distilleries there today now. It was a sort of stubbornness of will and a belief in what they did that said we will persevere despite it probably making more sense to shut down and build something in Speyside.
That was my next question. How did Springbank and Glen Scotia manage to survive all these years?
Well, they kind of didn't. They didn't. They both were closed for pretty much all of the 1930s. So it was a stop-start scenario for both the distilleries. Springbank had a slightly better run from the 1930s to present day. Glen Scotia was far more periods of closure, periods of uncertainty. When I lived there, Glen Scotia was pretty much mothballed. I think it ran a few weeks of the year just to tick over the equipment, and that was 2004. So that's not that long ago. And it's only been in the last 20 years that both distilleries have begun to be classified as fully open and fully operational. Prior to that, you've got the 90s where Springbank was depleted of stocks and were wondering what their future were. The 80s was a period of about 3 years of production in totality. And the 70s and 60s were better, but still not nowhere near other distilleries. So they both had a very checkered history. But I think, as I said, certainly for Springbank, the family involvement, the rights, there was no desire for Headley Wright to close the distillery down when he inherited it in, I think it was 1969, 68. In fact, his father said to him, "I want you to sell it. It's sort of an albatross hanging around your neck." And Headley had no intention of doing that whatsoever. So he plowed a lot of his money into that without ever really believing there would be much of a return for it. But other than that, there's a little bit of luck with Glen Scotia and a little bit of luck with Springbank. But yeah, they both survived.
Headley Wright is the reason Campbeltown is still a whiskey region, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I don't know how true this story is, but there's got to be some merit that he saw a map that had removed Campbeltown as a region. And his point with the building of the Glengyle distillery that we commonly know as Kilkerran is that if the Lowlands is a region, and rightly so, with only 3 distilleries, well, Campbeltown must have 3 to therefore remain as a distilling region. I've never seen the map that removed it, but I'll believe that as a story because Headley Wright was somebody that fought fiercely for the region, and if somebody ever slighted it in a way like that by removing it from the map, he would have done his darndest to make sure that never happened again. And it's paid off because there's no one now would ever consider the Scotch whisky map without Campbeltown.
Headley Wright was one of those people I always wanted to interview, but never got the chance because he didn't do interviews.
Well, the story I love about him is when I was working at the company, I asked, you never talk to him directly. You talk to the current chairman who was managing director then. I asked if Headley would help me with my research. And I got this reply about a week later. No, he's far too busy and everything's already been written and blah, blah, blah. So it's fine. You take what you can. And then a couple of weeks later, he sort of burst into the office, which the Cadenhead's office, which is now the Cadenhead Bar, with maps under his arm and a printed out history of his family that he had done and all these other bits and pieces. None of it was of any great help, actually, because I already had most of that. But that was kind of his personality was, when you got asked something, oh, no, I'm far too busy to do that. And then he would think, oh, hang on a minute, I've got this map and I've got this. And he came in with whatever he had. But the fascinating thing about Headley Wright and his side of the J&A Mitchell story is there's actually very little evidence of any of them. Headley Wright has not left any history about himself. You can't Google him. You can't look him up in the British archives. And same with his father, which was Gordon Wright. And then Olivia Bennett Wright was the grandfather. I might have some of this wrong because it's quite a convoluted story. But you'd think with names like that, you could put it into a Google machine and find a lot of information. There isn't anything. They're pretty much ghosts in our history. So when I was trying to do the history of Springbank, there just isn't anything there. And there's no one at the company who has any recollection really of anything beyond Headley's sort of upbringing. So there's some huge gaps in there for Springbank, but it is what it is. I can't make stuff up.
And Glen Scotia, how did it survive?
It survived by changing hands pretty much. My theory is that the two of them were at the time the best suited for blending as blenders saw whiskey for the period. So Springbank didn't seem to have a problem from their account books in supplying the large blending houses. And sadly, Glen Scotia's ledgers don't exist, but I'm going to guess that they'll be quite similar in that they were able to fulfill a part of a blend for enough people. So those two were able to weather the storm and by their very fingernails cling on to survival by being the most adaptable for what was required at the time. Their change in ownership meant great periods of silent seasons, and then sort of flurry of reinvestment, and then going silent again, and then so on and so forth. And it's really only been since the previous Loch Lomond group decided to invest in it, brought in Ian McAllister, that we have a period now of sustained production for Glen Scotia. That hasn't really been seen for 50, 60 years.
And it's a very underrated dram.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, not to do the old company any disservice, but it was just a part of their blending fodder. And the previous Loch Lomond group came in and said, actually, Loch Lomond and Glen Scotia make really good single malts, and we're going to start to heavily promote that. And boy, have they done a fantastic job on that. There's still a lot of people who have never heard of it, whereas Springbank obviously is far more infamous or famous. But the work they're doing at the moment, the whiskey they're doing, and I sort of, I put it out there that Ian's making the best Glen Scotia that's maybe ever been made there. So we have a period of production now that's going to catch up in a few years' time, where we're going to see a style and a quality coming out of Glen Scotia that will properly and seriously put it on the map. They're already advocates, but I think there's more to come.
And of course, we have to talk about the intensity of fervor around Springbank.
Yeah, well, obviously, they have been, and I'll say quietly, because then they've never been one to really sing their own praises. They've never sort of needed to. And the management style has always been, if we build it, they will come. It's a Field of Dreams scenario. If we make great whiskey, people will seek it out and they'll look for it. And that has created a following that is loyal, that is growing, that is worldwide. And from that, people have looked at Campbeltown and thought, do you know what? I know there's 3, but there used to be, as you say, nearly 30. How about a couple more distilleries down there? And we have 3 on the board at the moment, and there's rumors of a 4th. So with Witchburn, with Machrihanish and Dalriata, we've got in the next 3 to 4 years, 3 new distilleries in a small borough that when I lived there had 2. So it's pretty incredible.
I was about to ask about those 3. What can they learn from the history of Campbeltown?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope there is some history to learn from, and they've all bought my book too, so that's nice. But I hope there is some history to learn. But it's a very, very different era. And what struck me, and it didn't at the time when I worked for the company, when Glengarry was built, when Kilkerran was built, it was actually the first distillery built to be self-sufficient, to bottle its own whiskey as a single malt entirely. That had actually never, ever happened before in the industry at all. Every single distillery had been built to fulfill blending needs and requirements for other companies. So we have a very different era now where Witchburn, who are slightly different, Machrihanish, who will intend to bottle everything themselves, Dalriata, who are looking to be a single malt number 1 first and foremost, and Witchburn, who are actually being built to supply people again. So we've got a hugely more complex industry to what it was before, where it was simply a case of if there aren't customers, then we will fail. Now it's a case of we will build our customer base using malt whiskey drinkers out there. And as you know, and as all your podcast listeners know, we're all promiscuous. We all want to try the next dram. None of us buy the same whiskey week in, week out.
Yeah. What's next?
For me or for Campbeltown?
For you.
For me, I'm not sure. I have an idea for the book, and as I was researching this, it occurred to me that the Speyside story has never actually been told. Why did Glenlivet become the center of excellence for distilling? Why did everybody around Glenlivet want to suffix their name with Glenlivet? and why did it take over the blending world? The scramble for distilleries is a Speyside story. If you look at everything that happened around the Patterson crash, and I know you had Justine on, that was all Speyside. That was all done up in that area, around Forres and Duffton and all those places. So that's quite the book. But one thing that I found very difficult with this book was the 30 distilleries that are in here. That was a lot of time and research, and I would love to do an island that had 1 or 2 distilleries, just to make my life a little bit easier. To then take on Speyside, that I don't know how many have come and gone, 100 or something. That's quite a tome to research all of that, and maybe someone like Alan Winchester, who's from the area and is far more ingrained in it, is better to do it than me. I don't know. Challenge Alan.
David Stirk is the author of Whiskyopolis. His book is available through Amazon in the UK, as well as other booksellers and whiskey shops, but at present he does not have a U.S. distributor. By the way, last year David wrote Pioneering Spirits, a Barnard-like look at Scotland's new distilleries of the 21st century, so far. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with a Campbeltown single malt, Glen Scotia's flagship 10-year-old, bottled at 40% ABV. The nose has touches of dried fruits, a hint of spices, dark honey, and charred oak. The taste is thick and chewy with allspice and clove, balanced nicely by dried fruits, honey, a hint of anise, and charred oak. The finish is long with subtly lingering spices. I'm scoring the Glen Scotia 10-year-old a 90. Next up, the new Farmer's Fields bourbon from Lost Lantern Whiskey. This is a blend of bourbons from 4 grain-to-glass distillers, bottled at 59% ABV. The nose has touches of apple cobbler, honey, soft spices, and a hint of cocoa. The taste is thick and peppery with black pepper and cinnamon notes, balanced by red apples and honey. The finish, long and spicy with a hint of cherries. I'm scoring the Lost Lantern Farmer's Fields Bourbon a 92. Lost Lantern is also releasing a Farmer's Fields Rye Whiskey using 3 of the same distilleries as the bourbon. It's bottled at 58.7% ABV, and the nose has baking spices, molasses, honey, dark chocolate, and a soft oakiness. The taste is thick and oily with cinnamon, black pepper, and allspice, on top of red apples and honey. The finish, long with baking spices and a hint of molasses. I'm scoring the Lost Lantern Farmer's Fields Rye Whiskey a 93. One of the individual whiskeys in the Lost Lantern summer release is a wheat whiskey from Nevada's Frey Ranch Distillery. It's bottled at 60.7% ABV and comes from wheat grown on the Frey Ranch farm in Fallon, Nevada. The nose has touches of wheat bread, dried straw, and subtle spices. The taste is spicy and smooth with baking spices, honey, allspice, vanilla, and a hint of dried fruits. And the finish is long and dry with a slightly fruity character. I'm scoring the Lost Lantern Frey Ranch Wheat Whiskey a 92. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app now and see what people are talking about this week in our community segment. Canuck Sloth in Saskatchewan posted a photo of a bottle of Aaron Amarone cask finish the other day with this comment. Stopped in at a local liquor store and they had this Aaron on sale for $63. What is odd was the original price was $145, which seems crazy high compared to other provinces. It was a good deal either way, but I can see why it didn't move. Now, with the exchange rate, that translates to $46 U.S., which is important in the response we got from Alexander to Aiden's post. I have a bottle and enjoy it greatly. Got it for $70 where I live in Tennessee. Seemed like a good price. Some of the liquor store prices near me leave me scratching my head. Way too overpriced and then occasionally well below MSRP. Once I saw a handle cheaper than a standard bottle of the same whiskey sitting next to each other on the shelf. Alexander also posted a fun photo in the app this week a bottle of Balcones Mirador, a Glencairn glass, and his 2 dogs. Looks like everyone is excited for another Balcones bottle in the stable. Whiskey time for me equals biscuit time for them. As soon as the Glencairn comes out, tails start wagging. Smart dogs you have there, Alexander. And if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, whether it's your whiskey dogs or your latest dusty bottle find, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You can also find us on social media. We're on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. I mentioned the modified Solera system Bladnock's Dr. Nick Savage is using for his annual Waves releases during the news. How does a Solera system work, though? Well, basically, casks are stacked in tiers called criaderas, and new whiskey is added to the casks in the top tier. The oldest whiskey is drawn from the bottom casks and then replaced with whiskey from the next tier up. Because the bottom casks are never completely emptied, each bottling contains a portion of the original whiskey. The Solera system was originally created in Spain for maturing sherry and other fortified wines, but David Stirk pioneered its use in whiskey maturation at Glenfiddich way back in 1998 for creating the 15-year-old Solera Reserve. 15-year-old whiskey goes into the Solera vat at cask strength, and at bottling time, approximately half of the tun is emptied. Then another batch is added to the tun so that the Solera process never stops. You'll find my tasting notes for the Glenfiddich Solera Reserve at whiskycast.com, and if there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Discover the 2025 limited release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition, finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, a perfect fusion of craftsmanship and tradition. Here's to great whiskey and the game that inspires it.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.